Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.
Welcome to Leadership Voyage, the podcast dedicated to your pursuit of becoming a great leader. My name is Jason Wick, and in this 5th episode of Season 1, I talked to Janelle Ward. Janelle is the founder and principal consultant at Janelle Ward Insights, where she helps companies grow phenomenal UX research practices. She does this with an approach that focuses on research, vision, strategy, and operations. She's also active in coaching academics who are transitioning into UX research. Janelle spent the first 15 years of her career in academia. Her research focused on online political communication and later the user experience of dating apps. She's taught scores of research design courses and managed hundreds of research projects. She left academia to apply her expertise in another context and fell in love with the world of UX research. She's led UX research practices both as the founding lead researcher at Mendix and managed and grew the logistics UX research team at JustEatTakeaway.com. Janelle was born and raised in Minnesota and graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison before moving to Amsterdam to start her graduate studies. She's been in the Netherlands now for over 20 years and lives in the beautiful city of Leiden together with her partner, 11-year-old son, and 2 cats and a dog. In this conversation with Janelle, we talk about managing stakeholders. And what I loved about this conversation is, although we talk about stakeholder management specifically within the context of Janelle's business and clients, which is user experience research and software companies, many of the elements in our discussion apply to people in any working situation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Leadership Voyage with user experience researcher and consultant Janelle Ward. Okay, I'm here with Janelle Ward, who's been kind enough to set aside some time all the way over in the Netherlands to talk with me today. Nice to see you, Janelle.
Yeah, really nice to be here, Jason. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ran across, I became aware of you just a few short weeks ago in this UX Weekly newsletter I get. And for those of you out there listening who aren't really in the digital software world, UX, we'll be saying a bunch of times here, is for user experience. So in this UX Weekly newsletter, I read about you. They had a little interview with you, and that led me to an article that you wrote at sprig.com about stakeholder management. And it struck me as a very interesting topic because no matter where people are in their organizations, they have to deal with stakeholders. We chatted a little bit about this, but we said we would kind of talk about what is a stakeholder. I find it an interesting question because for me, it's a word that we use a lot. And it's almost so ubiquitous that I almost don't even know what it means anymore. So let's talk about a stakeholder. What is a stakeholder?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's one of those words. And actually, my background is in academia, and I never really used that word or knew that word before. Although now that I've kind of moved into the corporate setting, I have a much different understanding of it. But yeah, what is a stakeholder? I guess I would say really simply, a stakeholder is someone who has an interest in something. I think, it could be an individual, it could be a group, it could be an organization. But yeah, for simplicity, let's just talk about individuals mainly today.
Sure.
And I think like when you're in a professional context, it's really, someone who holds an interest in your work, whatever work you're doing in that organization. So for me, that would be UX research. And, for others, it could be any variety of things. And that interest that the stakeholder holds could impact them and their work, but it could also impact the work that you do. What do you think? What do you think about that? Or what's your definition of a stakeholder?
Yeah, I mean, I said someone who I think has a vested interest in what's going on. I like the bidirectional element that you're putting on this. In other words, for me personally, I often think about what is the work that I'm taking on, or what are the changes that I'm interested in pushing or championing, and what do the stakeholders think about such a proposal? But I love the addition that you're putting to this is what are your stakeholders doing or thinking, and how will that affect your work? So I think going in both directions is a nice nuance to add to the definition of the stakeholder. You just talked about coming from an academia background, right? And moving into the corporate world, as you said. Something that we chatted about, Janelle, when you and I first talked last week, was the shift from academia into corporate work. And something you said was you thought it was all about the research. I mean, you did say you're in UX research. What do you mean when you said switching from academia into corporate, you thought coming into corporate that it was all about the research? What does that mean?
So I decided after I was 15 years in the academic world, 10 as an assistant professor, and I had decided that I wanted, to find a different career. And when I heard about the world of UX research, user experience research, I thought it was perfect because that would allow me to practice my skill, my expertise, which was doing research, but I would do that in a different setting. And I thought that setting would be better outside the academic world because it would move faster than in doing academic research did. And it would also lead to actionable outcomes. So my research would actually impact something. Well, I was definitely right about that. And I love that about UX research. But the additional challenge I found that I also actually really love, and is sort of the heart of what I love about it now, is that when you're in UX research, when you're doing research inside of an organization, it doesn't matter if you are an absolute expert in the craft, that you know precisely how to put together a project. You need to have those skills. You need to have that expertise to do UX research well, but it's only half the battle. Because even if your project is absolutely perfect, even if you could submit it to an academic journal and get it accepted at the highest level, if nobody does anything with those insights and nobody cares, well, then your project isn't really going anywhere and you haven't impacted the organization. So that's really what I discovered early on is you need to talk to people, and we're calling them stakeholders here, and really understand their perspective and where they're coming from and see how your work can help them in their work and, in essence, influence the organization to become more user insights driven more by insights, research insights, than, let's say, by intuition or other means.
So we have the research itself, which is, if I'm following you, kind of the competency for your position anyhow. And then that's just half the battle. The other half is how are you going to understand the vantage points of your stakeholders? And I guess if I'm hearing you correctly, try to influence them with the insights that you have. Does that capture it pretty closely?
I think it's influence. So let's say one of your stakeholders was a product manager and you were sharing your research insights with them. And one thing, they could sit through the presentation and say, great, interesting, and walk away and continue the way they had planned. Or maybe they would stop and think, wow, this research has really shown me that this project X should be a priority for us, and project Y we should really put off, whereas I thought it was the other way around before. So it could impact prioritization of things. It could impact what gets on the roadmap. And it could also impact, down to how a particular feature is designed. But there's all sorts of different ways it can impact those stakeholders. And that's what we want as researchers. We want them to take that user perspective into their decision making.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that you have seen when we talk about really reaching that stakeholder with those insights? Like you've said, we want to understand their perspective. We want to hopefully enable them to have more information to put them in a position to make a good decision. What are some obstacles? What challenges get in the way, do you think, of this perfectly designed flow of information that should influence your stakeholder?
Yeah, well, I think that answer kind of can take two directions. And one would be thinking about the best ways to reach your various stakeholders as a researcher. So, that's really, it's again, this term stakeholders, but really what it is having empathy for other people in your organization who have different priorities and have different ways that their performance is measured. So it's really just understanding where they're coming from and meeting them where they're at. And I think there's lots of different ways to do that. You can reach out to people, try to get, really brief meetings with them, find out they get coffee every day at 10:15 and intercept them at the coffee machine.
Nice.
With
I like that.
a little tidbit of information. I mean, that's really organization specific and person specific. But I think the challenge isn't just how can we influence them? How can we reach them? But I think what you're asking also touches upon really kind of a problem I see in the UX research community sometimes. And that's that there's a lot of misunderstanding between researchers and non-researchers. And there's a lot of kind of, I don't want to say blame, but it's almost like researchers saying they don't know how research works. They don't understand what a research question is. They want our insights tomorrow and we just started. And I think this is perfectly normal. I think when you're in a group of experts and others outside don't understand, it makes sense to bond that way. But that bonding with UX research also happens in public spaces, in conferences where there are non-researchers attending, on LinkedIn. I see it a lot on my page as well. And I think it's understandable, but I think it kind of can make that divide larger, because also in the academic world, this would happen. If you feel that people are talking down to you or not empathizing with your position, you could shut down and just say, okay, I'm not going to, deal with these people, teach me what I need to know. So I think that the sort of, the challenge goes both ways. It's figuring out how to approach people, but it's also, keeping that empathy open. Just as we're trained to do that for our users in our research, we also need to do that with our internal stakeholders.
There are a lot of things in what you just said. Thank you for that. There's a lot I'm processing right now. So in some ways, it's kind of a fun managing stakeholders, if we want to call it that, working with stakeholders. It's kind of a more fundamental and transcendent dynamic than specifically stakeholder to us, I guess. Right. So empathy, I love that idea. You need to understand what the motivators are of that other person. You need to understand what they're, as you said, what are they rewarded for or incentivized for in the organization, all of that stuff. What I'm latching on to, which we didn't plan for, but what I'm latching on to is the adversarial part here. I did this talk a few years ago at a conference, and it was called Leave Behind Us Versus Them. And it was essentially about an experience I had working with a team that had several different interests, right? And then at the end of the day, the point was that the team had a goal and the individual interest had to come second to the team's goal. It strikes me as something very similar, because a dynamic I think is pretty common, as you're saying, is camaraderie around an enemy or a common adversary. We can all agree that those product managers don't understand us, right? As researchers, maybe. That sounds like a really hard thing to break down. I do like this idea of intercepting someone at the coffee machine at 10:15. I think that's pretty, what you happen to be here. Who would have thought, right? I think that's pretty cool. Any words of wisdom as a consultant out there, any words of wisdom on how to break the barrier virtually?
Yeah. Yeah, it is tougher. I think, when there's someone in your organization that you want to, reach out to, and you think that your work is interesting to them and their work is interesting to you, and it would be mutually beneficial, I think, just reach out. I think it's a very simple tip, but always ask to schedule a very brief meeting, even 15 minutes. If you book an hour, people, especially when they're busy, especially when we're working from home and have meeting after meeting all day long. I mean, it's hard to say no to such a short period of time. But you can also see where they're active. I mean, are they holding meetings where they're presenting and you can be in attendance and ask a question and make your voice heard and let them see your face and get to know you? Are they active on a Slack channel where you can comment on something they've posted if they're doing that for their work as well? So yeah, I think it's still in my mind a bit easier to intercept people in the real world than and all those sort of casual interactions that happen in the office place are harder to sort of mirror in a digital world, but there's still ways to do it. People are active online. They're not as accessible maybe as they were in the office, but there's still those moments. So yeah, make a connection and remember that it's mutually beneficial. It shouldn't just be beneficial to you. It should be also beneficial to them. And it's figuring out, that middle ground where they will look to you and want to speak to you in the future because you have valuable things to tell them. And you're also open for what they have to tell you about their perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks. Those are good points. I like the tactics and the all through the lens of mutually beneficial, I think is really important to keep in mind. That's great. I like the tactics of the ask about a 15-minute short meeting, engage with them where they're at, as you're saying, which comes back to what you're talking about with empathy and just understanding their perspectives and vantage points. So that's great. I thank you for those tactics. People can definitely try those out. You said you've been in academia for 15 years or so and moved into the corporate world, and relatively recently you've had the courage to go out as a consultant, right?
Yes, yeah.
On your own. What's the motivator behind that idea for you?
It's been an adventure, all of this, moving from the academic world into UX, really discovering what being in the UX research world is all about. And, the surprise to me was all of the work that goes behind sort of setting up this practice at a company and, all of the different moving parts, the kind of strategic, the need to set a vision. That's what I've done in my last two roles when I was in corporate roles. And that's really where my passion lies. I love doing research. But the thing is, when I'm doing a research project, I'm always kind of looking at the sort of overall view of this. Like, how is this going to fit into the big picture? What is the goal with research at this company? And I think what I've seen in my years working in-house, but also interviewing and being interviewed, I've seen a lot of companies, they want to get started in research and they want to hire a researcher who, has a couple years of experience, who knows the craft, and they want to bring someone in who gets started doing project work. And project work is important because that's what we're there for, is to do research. But there's so much more at stake than that. And someone who comes in to an organization and is busy with projects immediately, that's usually how it works because the demand is there, finds they do not have time to do all of the other things that are necessary to make it really a thriving practice in an organization. And what we've been talking about is the multitude of stakeholders, which in my view is pretty much everyone at an organization, at least a representative of every group at an organization. It's very difficult to maintain those relationships, to figure out the best way to approach them, to do project work, to advocate for that work before the next project starts to those stakeholders, to set up operations like, for example, participant recruitment. It's hard to do that in addition to the project work. And then thinking even broader, what is the vision for research within this particular organization? What is the strategy for hiring? Where are we putting these researchers in this organization as this practice grows? There's so much there. And that's the part I really love about this profession. And that's the part that I really want to help organizations with, is really, before they hire that first researcher, taking a step back and thinking about all of these aspects: vision, strategy, operations. How can we really set this up for success from the beginning?
That's great to hear. When you've got someone that you're working with who is looking to get things going from the beginning, what kind of challenges do you see with organizations trying to integrate something new like this, which is non-trivial, into what they're already doing?
Yeah, that's actually a huge question for me still, that I'm trying to to figure out. It's just so interesting, and yeah, it's just fascinating to me, because the thing is that any company that is successful, that's moving, let's say, from the startup to the scale up phase, is onto something. They started by talking to their users and their customers. They had that in their DNA. They understand that. It's part of who they are. So there were people doing that. That's part of kind of the successful startup model, right? But a researcher isn't considered really a sort of core member of that team from the beginning. It's someone who comes along much later. I mean, I was employee 400 and something in my first company.
Yeah. Okay.
So there were, I mean, everything, it was a very, mature setup, this company. I mean, it's changing all the time, of course, as it does in tech, but it was there. It just wasn't formalized into a role. And I think product managers need to have that as part of their role. But I think at some point companies realize, oh, we really need this to be a formal role. We need the expertise. We need to kind of not expect our product managers to do this in addition. But I think by the time that moment comes, that trigger, when it becomes a nice idea to bring in a researcher, when that moment comes, it's already sometimes too late, because product managers say, well, this is part of my job. This is what I do, or I already handle this because I've been handling it and I'm doing my job well.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge, it's like, I don't have the answer yet. I think I'll figure it out the longer I go on. But yeah, those are the questions I ask people. Is I'm trying to figure out that moment, like when that happens. And also, yeah, why hadn't it happened before? Because in my view, I mean, I'm a researcher, so it's clear I'm biased, but I think a researcher should be in much earlier and be setting that up from the beginning, rather than trying to kind of transform the mindset of a company after it's already been established.
In the blog that I referenced earlier at sprig.com, for those of you who want to check it out, it was April 14th, 2022 blog about managing stakeholders. The first role that you do call out in that article is the relationship between a UX researcher and a product manager. And for those who aren't in, again, for those of you not in software, I'll just give us quick synopsis. If you are in software, you can fast forward 15 seconds, but the product manager is essentially the person who sets the vision for what's going to happen with the product and works with the team to kind of get that built or delivered to trivialize the role. But so we talk about, if we follow the historical, the chain that you've built here for us, a product manager is going to be one of the earlier people at this startup, perhaps even a founder or something. And they are part of that research. Research is part of what they used to do, or they do. And now the UX person comes in, even though you like it earlier, oftentimes it's going to come in later. Why is the relationship between a UX person and a product manager so critical to the success of a project or a product, however you want to think about that?
Yeah, I think it's because, again, it depends on what the company's expectations are, and of course, what the vision is for research. There's a kind of a combination there. But I think the idea is that research can provide that user perspective to the product manager. So the product manager has to keep in mind, technical requirements and business requirements and user requirements. And the UX researcher could be described as someone who's really elevating the user requirements through their expertise. So whereas product managers were connecting with customers or users before, researchers can use different methods in their expertise to also observe users and come up with different ways to gain insights through their expertise. So I think it's because it's not just about, let's say, how the product looks. It's not just about improving the design of the product, but it's also about deciding, what needs to be prioritized. That's something research can help with. And also research can help with innovation as well, because research should, in my view, be focused mainly in the problem space, or what are the problems our users or customers are having. We're not trying to find solutions. We're trying to kind of understand that problem space. And then the product manager can come in with their expertise and, explore the solution space and come up with those ideas that we can then test and see if they succeed in the market. So I think, I've talked to a lot of product managers over the years, worked with quite a few as well. And some of them think that, they've been in their roles for a long time and they're experts on the customers and they don't need us. And I'm always grateful when they tell me that, because at least I know where they're coming from. It's always good to hear honesty, whatever that may be. And then there are others who come from organizations where they had researchers working side by side with them, and they're so keen to have us there, and they're used to that kind of relationship. But I think we're really providing, the user perspective. I say we're kind of waving the user flag in the meeting. We're not there actually to advocate what we think should be done. We're there to advocate for our insights. In my experience, that has been really, it's the first stakeholder I wrote about, and it has really been a key stakeholder in my experience as well.
Let's pretend that you've got that hypothetical product manager you referenced who said, "I don't need you." How do you deal with that stakeholder? Is it the same tactics we've already talked about, or do you think we should adjust expectations if we are in that dynamic with someone who's kind of upfront said, "Well, I don't know, I don't know quite why you're here. I think I don't need you, but great, thanks, nice to see you." Right? What do you think?
Yeah, that was. I'll never forget that moment, actually, because so what we did, what I've done, and what I continue to do in my consulting work is really talking to people about where they come from, what's their background, what's their experience with research, how what do they know about the user at their current company, so I understand their perspective. And that came out in this first meeting with this hypothetical product manager, and it was a bit of a shock. And I think it was a lesson on the spot to not get defensive and to just, thank this person for their honesty. And, we need to know where they're coming from. We need to hear that honestly. And it wasn't the last time, right? We would present insights in a large group, and, this person would voice, a different perspective was more valid. And I guess in this situation, there were others who would speak up for us as well. So it wasn't just, if it was the whole room against the researchers, I think that would really be challenging. And at some point you'd start to wonder, what am I doing here? This might be, a hill too high to climb. But I think it's good. I mean, that's really what I learned from that experience, is that there's going to be kind of a bell curve of skeptical to enthusiastic people in your organization when it comes to your work. And it's good to have skeptical people because it keeps you on your toes. And it's also just asking them, okay, what is it exactly that let's talk about this. Why don't you agree with this insight? Did you have another perspective that we needed to explore? Or how can we work with you on our next project to make sure that your, uncertainties about what we found are addressed in this next project? So, sometimes it works and it improves. Sometimes it doesn't. But if it's the whole organization, it's one story. If it's a couple people who are really skeptical and don't want to work with you, you keep trying, but hopefully you can see, the needle moving in the right direction, even with the skeptics in the room.
I like you stepping through the hypothetical here, so I appreciate that. I also think it's interesting because even though we are here talking about your functional expertise of user experience, we're talking about a certain context of software development. I'm pretty sure every one of us can identify or relate, I should say, with the ideas that you're talking about, having someone who maybe shuts you down prematurely or what have you. So I think that's really nice to hear that experience could apply to many people in many different contexts. I was going to ask you about hierarchy. How about dealing with stakeholders above you in the hierarchy? Because as much as we might strive for flat organizations or autonomy in certain contexts, there at the end of the day, there is a hierarchy almost everywhere. So any thoughts about that as far as managing stakeholders up or versus managing stakeholders who are, kind of peers, if you want to think of it that way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I do think, again, it depends on the culture of the organization that you're in. I mean, I, for one, feel like if someone approaches me who's interested in collaborating, who's wants to be involved in something great, I'll talk to them. I'll see what we can do to increase our collaboration, because I think that's really a key point of my job, is collaborating with people outside of UX research, in addition to my colleagues. Sometimes, I mean, so if there's someone who I approach who's higher on the food chain, who's just going to ignore me because my title isn't high enough for them, that's just how some people operate. So I think, okay, so get over it, take a deep breath, forget your ego, and think, all right, I want to reach this person. How can I do this? Maybe my manager can do it for me, or maybe someone at a higher level who's really an advocate for me can talk to this person. Yeah. And without requesting that, it's also possible to just talk to that person higher on the food chain and let them know, hey, this person, I think it would be really key to get them on board, or to get them involved in this, or to hear their perspective on this. How would you suggest that I approach them? So then you're actually building the bond more with the person that you have an alliance with, so to speak. Yeah. But you're also figuring out how to approach this person the best. And it could be they just need to have that sort of higher person connect you for them. So they see, oh, okay, this person is legitimate. And that happens sometimes in organizations. It depends on the culture, and even a fairly flat hierarchical organization could have people who, don't necessarily want to talk to you because your title isn't the sort of title they talk to on a daily basis. So it's just a matter of figuring that out. But yeah, I think like kind of leaving ego aside and really looking at your goal. What is your goal here? And that's also, I think, something to reflect on yourself. Like, is this person really someone who is key for your goals as a researcher, for making your organization more sort of user insights friendly, or is it someone you just want to, impress or reach out to? So you really have to also kind of reflect on your own goals for the conversation and for the contact, because I think that comes through to people. I think they see. They can see your motivations as well, depending on how you reach out to them.
What you said earlier on, that the role that we're discussing here is waving the flag for the user, for the customer, and keeping that in sight, right? That's something that I would imagine that you and your stakeholder can agree on, right? You can say, hey, we both want this for our users. So that's the motivator, that's the goal, as opposed to the, why aren't you listening to me, right? There's the distinction there, right, as hard as it is. But yeah, we've got a lot of really interesting stuff here, Janelle, talking about managing stakeholders. We've got empathizing. We've got meeting them where they're at. We've got the 1015 coffee machine trick, which I still love that one. Before we wrap this up, I wanted to give you an opportunity to make sure that everyone who has a listen here has a way to find you, to reach you. Where should people go when they're interested in what you're up to, your ideas, or your services?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm posting a lot there, lots of interesting discussions happening there on these topics right now. You can also find out more about my consultancy at my website, which is janelleward.com. And you can book a call with me there if you're interested in talking more about these topics. And I also write 2 newsletters, bi-weekly newsletters, and one is for people who are really looking to start up, grow a phenomenal UX research practice. And then another is another topic we've spoken about briefly today, which is geared toward academics who are transitioning into UX research. I regularly coach people who are making that transition because I did it myself. So we have a lot in common and tend to inspire each other a lot.
So as I ask everyone at the end here, what's something that you've learned recently, Janelle?
It's something I just posted about actually today. And it's this person that I'm talking to a lot of companies lately to kind of, ask them about all these questions we've been covering about, why do you set up research? How does it happen? What are the, the structures that need to be in place? And the more I talk to people, the more I realize there's this person that I'm calling the research hero. And the research hero is like a person who isn't a researcher. Sometimes they're in product or design, but they're really 100% committed to getting research established at their company. And they're willing to kind of sometimes even fall on their sword and offer up like their own headcount to get that person on board. And they're doing what we've just talked about. They're doing this stakeholder management, reaching out to other people in the company and really trying to get support for this move. So I'm really interested in talking more to that kind of person. I think it's a super critical role to understand in an organization. And it's also elusive because it isn't in a job description. It isn't a researcher. It could be someone doing this in one role, but not another. So it's a really sort of, interesting thing that I've discovered recently after talking to people that I want to learn more about in the coming months.
Cool. The research heroes, you're saying?
Yeah. Research hero. Yeah.
Love it. All right. Everybody find Janelle on LinkedIn. You can read about that from, what's the date today? June 1st. That's easy enough. June 1st, 2022. Cool. Well, Janelle, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody who listens will appreciate it. A lot of actionable things for managing stakeholders for any of us to take into our contexts. So thank you for sparing a few minutes today and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason. It was really interesting talking to you. You asked some tough and thought-provoking questions. So I'm definitely leaving with a lot of inspiration myself.
Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.